I believe as a uniform person, you need an ID for everything. If I stop you, I want to see ID. You can't even get into Costco without an ID, but you can vote without an ID. As a matter of fact, I went to the voting booth and they said, oh, we don't have your name, here's an affidavit. Took the girl 2 seconds to give me an affidavit. And I said, no, my name should be there. Can you look? She didn't find it. I went to another school and they found it because I was there for 30 minutes saying you have to find my name.
How'd they find it?
So this affidavit thing, any Mary Jo Smith can walk in and they'll say, here's an affidavit. And then she signs it and says, hey, I promise that I'm Mary Jo Smith. If you're gonna do it, you're gonna have to do it the right way, just like most things. But I can guarantee you that there was a few votes that should have never counted.
Back, it's Table Talk Tuesday on Liquid Lunch on NEWSMAX TV. I'm John Tobacco. See those little bump-ins we're using? Those things were shot in 2016 before Trump was even inaugurated. And people on the street were talking about, oh my God, they might do voter ID and let illegal aliens. We were on that story 2 years ago, and little by little, it's creeping into our community. So we got to stay alert and aware on that stuff. But it's hour 2 of a Liquid Lunch today. Bill Cortez is still with me in studio. And now we go on to Skype to Shireen Qudosi. Shireen has been with us before. Thank you for joining us today on Liquid Lunch, Shireen.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And you're a Muslim reformer. You're a national coordinator for Clarion Projects. You're a senior contributor to Counter Jihad. And you're working on your first book, Islam's Original Story. And I really wanted to get the take of a Muslim woman in America and how it makes you feel to hear that our president and our armed forces got the #1 most wanted terrorist in the world.
It was a huge day of celebration for Muslims. This is exactly the kind of wins we need, the kinetic wins that we need when we're taking on the most notorious leaders within terrorist organizations. But we also have to remember that this is only half the battle. The other half of the battle is within the policy work that we can do, the alliances that we can build across sectors, that we still need to, at the heart of this war, defeat the ideology that breeds Islamist terrorism. So when we look at someone like bin Laden, when we look at someone like al-Baghdadi, these are individuals who, they're essentially actors, and the actors will always change up, but the ideology must be defeated, and that is where I would like us to now take this win and shift our focus to.
Well, Shireen, I know you're working on your book, Islam's Original Story, and I would think, you know, getting to the bottom of it will explain to people that when the Washington Post refers to this guy as an austere religious scholar, that's not what Islam's all about, is it?
Right. I think it's really interesting that the Washington Post referred to this guy as an austere religious scholar, because for the left, Islam is not, or ISIS is not Islamic until it's convenient, until the narrative needs to be washed down, until a win by Donald Trump needs to be washed down. And so when we look at someone like Baghdadi, when we look at someone like Osama bin Laden, yes, they are a Muslim, but these are not the representations of Islamic teachings. And it's really important for this war, for us to be very specific in our language. And this comes back to what conservatives have been saying from day one, that there is something that within this faith, and this is how Muslim reformers have allied with conservatives, that there is something within this faith that needs to be looked at. This is what Donald Trump was saying when President Trump was at the time running for office, was saying that there is a problem within this faith, that they hate us. And that is a very simple statement, but is a very important statement for us to start looking at what is within the bedrock of this ideology that is enabling actors like bin Laden, that is enabling actors like Baghdadi, and that is enabling the next wave of terror, whatever ISIS 2.0 is going to look like, whatever the next terror organization is going to look like. So it's very, very important that we're educated and specific in the language that we're using to describe the events in our lifetimes.
Hey, Shireen, I have Bill Cortez, a Marine veteran, good friend of the show, in studio with me. Billy wanted to ask you a question also.
Of course.
Shireen, I've done a fair amount of traveling over in the Middle East, and what I've found is that taxi cab drivers always tell you the skinny, they always give you the truth. And what I found that is interesting is talking to people on the street. Their version of their faith, their view of America is usually very different than what their government's views are. And where do you see the difference between people, your average person in the Middle East, your average believer in Islam is compared to some of the governments over there that have kind of, I think, hijacked this religion. Can you talk about kind of the difference in between what's happening on the street and what's happening in the capitals?
Of course, the average person is not subjected to the privilege of theocratic rule and dictatorships. The average person is trying to just get on with their lives, and faith is very private to us Muslims. It is not something that we want politicized. If it was something that we want to politicize, there wouldn't be millions of Muslims trying to flee these dictatorships and come to the United States where we enjoy these freedoms. And that's why it's very, very important for us Muslims in the West who are in a place of privilege to speak out and use their platforms and to use their First Amendment rights to speak on behalf of all those folks in the Middle East, especially the next generation in my age bracket and younger, who want exactly the kind of freedoms that we enjoy, and they don't want the Islamist rule. They want faith to be a very private thing. And so the taxi cab driver story is very accurate, is the best representation of people who just, end of the day, want their freedom and want to be able to provide for their families and live their lives and have faith be something that's very private to them, not have it be something that drives policy.
All right, well, Shireen, I wanted to ask you this. You're a Muslim American, and it seems to me that some of these supposed scholars have almost bastardized the religion. What makes you stay with your faith despite these bad apples?
Right, so I actually went and studied the faith. I was very close to skirting away from it until I went and properly studied it with another sheikh. And so what I realized is that what we're doing as reformers is not that original, that Islam has a very rich heritage of questions and philosophy, and we have sort of a duty to really ask really critical questions and to have critical loyalty towards our faith. And so when we do that, we realize that there's a difference between what Islam was intended to be, the origin story, versus what it has become. And so what happens with a lot of these scholars is the same thing that we're seeing in Western academia at this point, is that the narrative is contorted to fit whatever the policy or the politics of the hour are. And so even someone like Baghdadi, for example, just because he's quote unquote a PhD, doesn't make him an expert on Islam. It doesn't make him a critical thinker or necessarily even educated beyond just having some sort of degree or some sort of training in Islamic studies, because what Islamic studies is also has changed over time. There's a difference between what the Quran says, and even then what this message and the spirit of the message was supposed to be, versus what actually manifested, and then what manifested in the hundreds of years after the Prophet's death in terms of what Islam was supposed to be, and then what these philosophers and scholars shaped it into in order to continue to flesh out the faith. And so there's two very different things: what Islam was supposed to be and what Islam has become, and then what Islam can still be today.
Fantastic.
Shireen, with al-Baghdadi's death, what do you see the future is for ISIS? I mean, do you see another rapprochement with al-Qaeda? Do you see al-Qaeda kind of coming in and filling this void and taking over where ISIS is kind of left off? I mean, clearly we know that there is a structure, there is an infrastructure there for them to move up when things like this happen. What do you see moving forward with ISIS now that al-Baghdadi is dead?
Right. So with ISIS, I mean, it really just depends. We've secured so much intelligence. We've secured a list of high-value individuals, laptops, cell phones in this raid. So that's going to really shape what the next phase is going to look like. But also, the effects of his death are going to be shaped by the next, let's say, 3, 6, 12 months, 24 months. And is ISIS going to have the same sort of regional power in Syria? Probably not, because of the competing factors there. But ISIS still has a lot of affiliates in South Asia and West Africa. And so it's best to think of ISIS as a franchise, and then to think of this death or the killing of Baghdadi not as something that happened in a vacuum, but as something that really still has an impact on the rest of the affiliates, in the sense that the ideology still stands strong. When it comes to al-Qaeda, there's something that's really interesting to note. The International Center for Study of Radicalization put out a really great graphic yesterday by Joanna Cook, and that talked about it's a gun with a thumbprint. It's on my Twitter, Qudosi, where it looks at al-Qaeda as a governance, or sort of looks at how they're governing in Yemen. And that is a very fascinating graphic to look at, because it looks at what al-Qaeda is doing, which is essentially working within vigilante structures to provide some sort of resources and solutions and de-escalate the sort of psychomania of ISIS, whereas ISIS is still largely seen as sort of, to quote somebody else, the abusive enraged uncle in the family of jihadis. And so it's going to be a really interesting competition in the sort of months to come, in terms of how does ISIS adapt to the response of the news of this week, or does it continue to sort of really be escalated in its sort of mania?
All right, well, we'll keep our eye on that. Shireen Qudosi, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you for staying with us through hour 2. Stay right there. We're going to be back right after this. Back to the crypto conference in Vegas with Manny Alejandro, Drew Taylor, and the Wild West Crypto Show. All that and more right after this.